Hi everybody, I want to thank you for joining me for this first episode of a new vlog that I'm calling Higher Dimensions, where we'll look at what it means to live life in this 3D world from higher dimensional frequencies and realities. Now, I'm brand new to doing YouTube videos or even this kind of recording, and so you have to forgive me for the quality of it if it's not great. And, example, my background isn't great, but it's my office and this is where my computer is. And I've been putting this off for at least, I don't know, several months. And I just decided today to quit procrastinating and get started. So here we go. I want to talk to you today about my spiritual awakening, my awakening. And I know awakening's kind of a buzzword that's out there right now. And I didn't know it at the time. I was calling it an awakening before I knew that because that's what it felt like. You know, all of us have had dreams where we thought the dream was reality, and then we wake up and discover, oh, that's not what I thought it was. It's not real. That was just a dream. In a lot of cases, we're like, oh, thank God that was a dream, just a dream, because it's, full of anxiety or a nightmare or whatever. And then there are other dreams that we're like, oh, man, I wish I could go back to that dream. I'm sorry that was a dream because it's so good. So let me tell you a little bit about my dream life, if you will. I was born and raised in a Christian home. My mom tells me that I received Jesus Christ at 3 years old as my Lord and Savior. My mom read Bible stories to us. We were taught Christian values, and I appreciate so much about that part of my journey and my background. And when I was 18 years old and trying to think about what I was going to do with my life, I felt that I had a calling to ministry, and that was confirmed to me by others. So at 18 years old, I took my first job in ministry as a youth pastor, and I've been in some kind of Christian leadership since that time. And I've done everything that I can think of that involves church or leadership. I've done the nursery, I've done home church, home Bible studies, I've done the bathroom ministry where you clean the bathrooms, the helps ministry. I've been a pastor, an associate pastor, and I was fairly successful with what I was doing. In fact, the last 2 years, our church was awarded by our community the award of being the best place of worship. And I got second place for being the best mover and shaker in our community. I had been privileged to travel, to do leadership conferences, to be a consultant for other churches and pastors. I had even done some national leadership conferences and things like that. And yet, if I was honest with myself, I really was not satisfied with where I was at. And so on August 13th, 2016, I had this experience. When I woke up from this experience, it was almost like this. It was almost like I could look at my life in ministry or my professional life as climbing a ladder, trying to get to the top of it, getting to the top or near the top where I wanted to be, and looking over and realizing, crap, it's leaning against the wrong building. So here's what happened. On August 13th, 2016, I laid down to meditate, which I've done hundreds, probably thousands of times before. I lay down to meditate and I get caught into this trance state. Now, for those of you that don't know what a trance is, it's like having a dream when you're awake. You're not aware of your physical surroundings at all. You're only aware of the experience that you're having in the trance. And so in this trance, I'm walking down this path and I come to a clearing where there are two trees. There is one tree that is filled with light, and it had an angel standing by that tree. And there's this other tree that's there that's covered in this darkness, kind of shady side. And I'm looking at both trees, and the angel speaks to me and he says, when you disown your shadow self, you will mistake the voice of your shadow self for the voice of God. Now, I realize there are some of you out there that don't know what a shadow self is, and I'll do another video on that specifically. But the short definition is the shadow self is sort of like this psychological waste dump inside our minds where we put all the parts of ourselves that we don't like for whatever reason. It could be because we judge it as immoral. It could be that we just don't like it for whatever reason. And it's out of that self that most of our anxiety, depression, and problems come from. And one of the real problems that I'll address in another video is that within the Christian world, particularly the evangelical and especially the charismatic world, there is really nothing that they give us that works to address the shadow self or even recognize its existence. The problem with the shadow self is when you shave off these parts of yourself that you don't like and you disown them, you experience them as being other than you, which means you project them. The classic example within psychology is that you will project it onto other people, and you will judge and get angry at other people for what's in you. But in a spiritual sense, you can project it as being from an entity called the devil, or in my case, at least in some instances, according to the angel, which I was later able to verify out of my own experience, we mistaken it, the voice of the shadow self, for the voice of God, which means we think we're hearing God, doing the will of God and following the voice of God, when really it's the voice of our own disowned self that's trying to get our attention so that we can embrace, love it, and integrate it. And so the angel says to me about the shadow self, I'm looking at this shadowy tree, and all of a sudden I'm in this experience where there are all these talking heads, like 1,000 talking heads, looking at me and talking all at the same time. And I can't make heads or tails of what any of them are saying. And I realize that this is a representation for me of my own experience and participation within the Christian self-help industry. And here's what I mean by the Christian self-help industry. We go to conferences, we read books, we attend services, we hear sermons, all about how we can be better at something, how we can do better at prayer, how we can do better at church attendance, how we can be a better father, a better husband, how we can be, in my case, a better leader or a better pastor, whatever the case may be, a better Christian, better at praying, better at moving in gifts of the Spirit. We get all these principles that we are taught, and we believe if we internalize, if we eat from, if you will, these trees of knowledge, and we do the good and shun the evil, that then somehow we'll become something that is better in the earth and even more pleasing to ourselves and to God. The problem is, it doesn't work. It's mission impossible to take all those things and integrate them into yourself. And so the result of that, what actually happens is that you internalize a standard that you believe you have to live up to. And then when you don't live up to it, you create another part of yourself that accuses and judges. And remember, wherever there is a judge, there has to be someone. If there is a sentence, there has to be someone who takes the punishment. And so we have this judge inside of us that sentences parts of ourselves that we don't like, and that becomes more part of our shadow, and our shadow just continues to grow. And so then the angel said something else to me that shocked me. The angel said to me, the greatest Satan that you will ever have to overcome is the Satan within yourself. Now please understand, the term Satan in the Bible is not a proper name. Please stop with that. If you're watching this, if you happen to be a pastor, a leader, a Christian, please, for the love of God, stop using Satan like it's a proper name for a being who's ruling in hell or ruling in the heavenlies or something like that, because that is not at all what it is in the Bible. It is not a proper noun. It is not a proper name. It is a term that simply means an accuser. An accuser or an adversary, an enemy. And so what happens to us is we end up creating our own accuser, our own Satan that is inside our minds, that sits there and accuses us for not living up to all these things that we're supposed to be living up to. And the angel tells me the greatest Satan you'll ever face is not some objective being that's been around since the dawn of time and led a rebellion. The greatest Satan that you will ever face is the Satan inside yourself. And then the angel asked me, can you learn to love yourself? And without going into all the details, the next thing that happens is I'm taken through a timeline of my life. And significant times in my life where I made decisions that determined the path and the direction and the trajectory that my life had taken. And I realized in the instances that I was being shown that even though I thought I was doing the will of God and following the voice of God, I was really listening to the voice of my own shadow. And I came out of that experience, really with the mission, can you learn to love yourself? But here's what happened. I came out of that experience, and all of a sudden I could see all the dysfunctional patterns that I was creating that I had been asleep to before. I could see the dysfunction within myself. I could see the dysfunction within the church and religious community. And I began to see things differently. I began to see God differently. I began to see the Bible differently. I began to see the problems with the institution and the philosophies, if you will, and it was not a pleasant experience because I was staring at all of that. But I also began to see people differently, and I began to see God differently as well. The culmination of my experience happened when I was going to therapy. Now, understand, I was going to therapy because I was trying to sort this out, sort my life out from this experience. And I find myself working with a therapist, looking at another part of the shadow. And I feel like when I'm talking to the therapist that I'm seeing in my mind a representation of God who is disappointed with the path that I have taken. Now, please understand, I was never a legalistic preacher. I never majored on sin. I was very much a part of the grace movement and a grace preacher. Yet, even within that, there are still these subtle presuppositions and messages that get sent that we're not okay in our journey the way we are, and we still need to self-improve. And I'm looking at this shadowy image, and I feel like it's God, and I feel like He's disappointed with me. And my therapist says, is God sitting in judgment of you? And before I could even think to answer, I just spit out, He's not sitting in judgment, He's sitting in wrath. And she says something very profound. She says, well, what if you look at that image and just tell it bullshit? And I thought to myself, I am not telling the Almighty bullshit on any day, but especially when I think the Almighty is unhappy with me. So she says, well, why don't you just go up and give that image in your mind go up and give that image a big sloppy kiss. And I thought, well, I can do that. The Bible says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. And so in my mind, I went up and I kissed that image, and instantly the shadow fell, and I felt the pleasure of being who I was. I felt the pleasure of God. And it was like all the engines inside of me shut off all at once. And the most amazing thing happened. I found that I naturally wanted to love people. I found that I naturally was abiding in a state of peace and compassion. That this low-level frustration that I was carrying in my life was gone. It was amazing because even the muscles in my body relaxed, even the muscles in my face relaxed. I went home, looked in the mirror, I'm like, my God, how did I get those muscles so tight within, carrying all that stuff? And I remember sitting around for about a week and just thinking, you mean all the problem I had internally wasn't a result of traumas that I experienced in my childhood. It wasn't a result of being picked on the playground or being abused or any of that stuff. The result, the cause of my problem was my perception of God. Blew me away. So then all kinds of synchronicities started happening in my life. See, when you don't live authentically, when you don't love your whole self, and you don't live from an authentic self inside, you are actually not able to keep the agreements that your soul made, that you as an eternal being made before you came into this world. And so when you do the work on yourself and you begin to live out of your authentic self, life becomes so much easier because you begin to experience synchronicities, and life just begins to come to you. And the inside begins to agree with the outside, and the outside begins to agree with the inside. Doesn't mean you don't have struggles, doesn't mean you don't suffer or have trials. It just means that there comes an ease and a flow to life. And so when you awaken, you'll have experiences with higher beings, angels, God. You'll experience a higher consciousness, but you'll also see the dysfunction of those lower patterns. But the journey is a journey to learn, to accept, and to love yourself. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching it. I hope you'll subscribe to the channel. I hope you'll comment. Good, bad, doesn't matter. Comment at the bottom. Let me know what you think, and I'll be doing some more videos in the future. Thank you for watching, whatever time it is for you, morning, afternoon, evening, nighttime, whatever it is. I hope it's good.